Hello, everyone. Now we're going to be talking a little bit about political parties. And I'm not going to be getting into detail about each of the political party themselves or what their stances and policies actually are, but just talk in general about political parties and go into a little bit about third parties in general. Okay, political parties function, representation, and the role of third parties. Okay, so let's talk about what political parties are. And well, they're a group of people with similar interests who work together to create and implement policies by gaining control over government through winning elections. Well, that's obvious. But how do they do that? Well, they do that a number of four different ways. And first of all, they nominate candidates for their party. They do it through a selection process. There's two different selection processes for both of the two main parties that we have, the Republicans and the Democrats. But they go through a process of nomination. They also coordinate campaigns for the candidate that they do nominate. They raise money, conduct advertisements, and create actually a campaign staff. And in the process, they guide legislation based on the needs and desires of the constituents, their voters. And in turn, they inform the voters with the coordinated campaigns that they create. They those campaigns are communication devices for most of the political parties, and they inform about the candidate they nominate, and also about the legislation that they are going to be supporting as a party based on party interests, but also supposedly based on the voters' interest. Now, there's a distinction that should be made between what political parties are and interest groups. They have different goals, focus, and approaches. Now, political parties, their goal is to just win, to win the office and to control the government. And the interest group is to influence the policy, not so much as to support the candidate, but to support the policy or support the party, but the policy mainly. Um, the focus of a political party is a broad range of issues, and those issues can change. Whereas the interest group, their interests don't change. The issues that they have interest don't change. It's very narrow. It's very specific. Um, the the Green Sierra Club has a very narrow interest of um, protecting our natural resources, our wetlands and such. The NRA has interest in protecting the Second Amendment. It's a very narrow focus. So the approach of political parties, they have a big tent, a diverse coalition of people who they support based on the various interest groups. So they have a number of interest groups under each political party. Whereas an interest group, they have specialized advocacy for that group of interests, whether it's gun owners, whether it's, well, in the general public with the Sierra Club, but also the LGBTQ. It's a very special advocacy for that group of individuals. Okay, so now let's consider how partisanship influences representation. Now, what is partisanship? And now that is just a very strong support for a political party. Um, Even if the party changes its stances on certain issues, you'll stick with the party. And you might take on issues that you wouldn't otherwise support based on a very specific issue that they do support. And so you'll support that party no matter what. And this has definitely shaped how elected officials view their duties. And this leads to polarization, and that's a widening gap between the parties. Is that leaders of these parties know that the bigger gap they can create between their opposition, the better chance of a loyal following, a loyal partisan following, and that thus increases their likelihood of winning or maintaining power. But in essence, we can have a divided government with, even despite the polarization, we can have a divided government where one party controls the White House and the other controls one or both chambers of Congress. That creates a gridlock of sorts where not a lot is getting done. And sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. Now, models of representation, well, this is coming from the actual parties themselves. How do they represent the public? Well, on the left, it's a delegate model where the representatives, the politicians, see themselves as agents of the people and they vote strictly according to the wishes of their constituents, regardless of their own personal views. And that's being loyal to their voter base. Okay. In the middle, we have the trustee model where the representative believes they are elected to use their own best judgment and they vote based on what they think is the best for the country, even if it goes against the constituents' opinion. Okay. But then there's a hybrid approach where the representative acts as delegates on issues of importance to their constituents and as trustees on complex or less visible issues. And usually those have to do with um, foreign policy and also issues of economic, complex economic issues having to do with our currency, our banking system. Sometimes they make decisions that the greater public may not understand and may not appreciate, and they feel that it's in the best interest of the country. Now, this brings us to the structure of what we call the two-party system. Now, you ask yourself, well, why only two parties? Why do they dominate? And the main reason why is because the United States, it uses a winner-take-all system. And it's not like they have in Europe where they have proportional representation. You don't have one person winning all of the vote. It's proportional according to how the percentage of votes that they got. But however, our winner take all system, it is actually a barrier for minor parties, third parties, to be able to take foothold in our system. And that's why we have a two-party system, and that's called Duverger's law. And this is the law is where a winner take all system makes it nearly impossible for third parties to gain a foothold in Congress, which is true. So it's not just the presidency, it's also Congress. There have been a few libertarians and a few Green Party members in Congress. Of course, there hasn't been any in the presidency. And well, what about third parties? Over in the right, it'll tell you. Well, first of all, there's barriers to entry because of lack of ballot access. Um, there, both of the two parties have done a good job of being able to keep them off the ballot, third parties off the ballot with one reason or another, whether it be technicalities on being able to gather enough signatures to get on the ballot, setting dates of gathering signatures in an unreasonable fashion where it's impossible for them to gather the signatures, disregarding the signatures that's necessary to get on a ballot. Lots of methods that they use to keep you off the ballot, keep the third party member off the ballot. Also, they're excluded from debates, and you'll see the debate that I showed you. It's probably very strange to you that you saw an independent debating with a Republican and a Democrat. Yes, that was probably the last time. He was very, he scared both parties. And this is why today these barriers have been put in place in a more intense fashion since 1992. And also fundraising challenges. Um, you're not supposed to give money to a third party candidate. That's looked at as something, especially after 1992, that's looked at something that's bucking the system. And fundraisers like to keep the system intact and change it to their satisfaction. But Ross Perot didn't really necessarily need fundraising. He was his own billionaire, and he had his own method of communicating, which we'll talk about. But Third Party creates issue awareness. They often bring neglected issues to the national agenda. The Green Party on environmental issues. That's why the Democrat Party has taken on a lot of Green Party initiatives. And the same with the Republican. They've looked at some of the libertarian issues. The libertarians have policed them on a number of different issues to maintain freedom, small government. And they create a spoiler effect too, and they can draw votes away from major candidates and potentially alter the election outcome. In 2000, that's what Ralph Nader did. Um, Actually took votes away from Al Gore, which was the Democrat candidate at that time. Now, what is the impact of the third party? There can be a catalyst for innovation as a safety valve. Um, that safety valve concept. It's well, if you feel that you're alienated from the two parties, which a lot of people do feel, and that's why there's been intense talks of third party creation in the last 10 years. They feel alienated by the two party establishment, and there's political stagnation. Um, so they become a bit of a safety valve. And so the two parties, they tend to respond in different fashions to third party candidates, especially since 92. Whether it's taking on their policies, taking them into the fold, so to speak, in their party, and appealing to the voters, taking by at least considering it, and if not being fake about it, which usually they are fake about it. Third parties create policy innovation. They bring, well, issues like abortion, suffrage, and the national debt. Those were third party ideas before the major parties adopted them. And throughout history, and we'll go into a couple of those in a minute. They create a spoiler effect. Even without winning, they can shift elections. And like I said, in Ralph Nader in 2000, he was blamed as the reason why Al Gore did not win and why George W. Bush won that election. And agenda setting, major parties often absorb the successful third party platforms. So if a third party candidate is loud enough, those people are going to be desirable candidates for the major party. So they're going to absorb their platform, or at least part of their agenda. And so let's talk about the two of the major disruptors throughout history that were third party candidates. First on the left is Teddy Roosevelt. Call him Bull Moose. He was a progressive. Okay, and this is at the time of a lot of industrialization. There was a lot of exploitation of workers. And so there was a lot of cry from the working class that changes need to be made to protect the working class. So he actually won 27% of the popular vote. And some of our candidates today don't even get that. The highest ever for a third party candidate. Well, 27% of the nation. They more like 22% of the nation registered voters. Some of the candidates get, but 27% is pretty big. Okay, It split the Republican vote, leading to Woodrow Wilson's victory, which is tragic. Woodrow Wilson was one of the worst presidents we've ever had, and I have no problem saying that. He actually had the KKK in the White House, and showing the movie The Birth of a Nation, and he was also the one to oversee the creation of the Federal Reserve System, which has devastated our financial system since. And he even had to admit it when he got out of office that he sold his country out. So it was a split, but it was not good for our country. So Teddy Roosevelt's legacy is he forced major party concept to adopt progressive reforms like the 8-hour workday. So you owe that to Teddy Roosevelt, the 8-hour workday, and his disrupting. George Wallace in 1968. He was an American independent. He actually won 46 electoral votes in the South. Okay. And he was the last third party candidate to win any electoral votes. And so that's what the Electoral College also kind of keeps third party candidates out of the way. It's hard to win electoral votes, a whole states. You can win partial states, but third parties have a hard time winning the whole state. Now, George Wallace, his success forced both parties to rethink their strategies for Southern electorate, and he leveraged regional grievances to bypass traditional party gatekeepers. So, both of these two men were a big scare in the past, but the modern outsider, Ross Perot, well, it's proven that there maybe should have been more consideration. A lot of the things that he said has come true. And he was a very folksy guy. I remember watching him debate, and he seemed like a very honest guy. And he was a folk hero, image promising to be a servant to the voters and the non-political fixers for the national debt. He was very concerned about the national debt, and he was very concerned about jobs going overseas. And because he made his own money, he came from nothing, and he made his own money, and he was able to give communication directly to the public with infomercials. I remember those infomercials; they were awesome. And he could directly speak to the general public in a way that everyone could understand. He used charts and graphs to explain issues, but he spoke in very plain English. And he gave the warning that NAFTA, North America Free Trade Agreement, was going to create a giant sucking sound, and a lot of jobs will be lost. I think he was correct. So he won 18.9 share of the popular vote, 19.7 million votes, and his number one issue was actually the federal deficit. He realized as a very sound business-minded person that the government was not going to be able to sustain itself running the way it is, and he's correct. And a lot of what we're experiencing right now with inflation as such is a result of not heeding his warnings. Okay. So why do third parties matter? Well, they set agendas, they expand the electorate, and well, they still continue to have systemic barriers, and I think that the nation needs to look at that. They have a disdain for the two-party system. Most people do, they do, but they don't see a way out of it. I think that maybe it needs to be considered that us as the general population, well, what can we do about it? Because third parties ultimately are the voices of the people that the established cannot afford to ignore. And so maybe that's where the actual power of the people can have potential to exist. So maybe we can consider that the two-party system has failed, and as of lately, they've done a lot to kind of tell us that and remind us that. And so maybe at some point in time, someone will come out and be another disruptor to shake things up a bit. Maybe that's what we need.